At the corner of a small-town gym, an old man sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the recruits hammering through pull-ups, sprints, and rope climbs. Sweat dripped, muscles strained, and laughter echoed, but the old man never flinched. He just watched. Then it happened. As he reached to roll up his sleeve, the room fell silent. On his weathered forearm, faded but still sharp, was a tattoo 2 arrows crossed in perfect symmetry. At first, the young recruit smirked, whispering that it was just some biker ink. But one instructor froze mid-step, his jaw tightening. That symbol wasn't a decoration. It wasn't from a parlor. It was earned. The crossed arrows were the insignia of a long-forgotten rescue unit, a brotherhood that had gone where no one else would. Men who walked into chaos so that others might walk out alive. And suddenly, the whispers died. Because in that gym, surrounded by the noise of youth, silence spoke louder than any voice. The gym smelled of chalk, sweat, and determination. Metal weights clanged, sneakers squeaked against rubber mats, and the steady rhythm of grunts filled the air. For the recruits of Redstone Training Academy, this was just another punishing afternoon. At the far end of the gym, near the wall where an old punching bag hung unused, sat a man who didn't belong. His hair was silver, his posture slightly hunched, and his coat looked like it had been through more winters than any jacket should. He said nothing, did nothing, just sat there on a wooden bench, his hands folded across his lap. At first, the recruits barely noticed him. They were too busy proving themselves, one-upping each other with heavier lifts, faster sprints, louder shouts. But soon enough, whispers began. "Who's grandpa over there?" one muttered between sets. "Probably waiting for his grandson," another chuckled. David, the youngest in the group, smirked. "Maybe he's here to show us how push-ups were done back in the Stone Age." The laughter spread, quick and careless, bouncing around the room like an echo chamber of youth. But the old man didn't flinch. His gaze stayed fixed on the recruits, steady and unreadable. And then, as if fate had been waiting for the right moment, the man shifted. He rolled up his sleeve to wipe his brow. The fabric slid back just far enough for the recruits to see it a tattoo. 2 arrows crossed with precision, etched deep into skin that had weathered decades. The room stilled. The laughter faltered. One of the instructors froze mid-step, his eyes narrowing at the sight. His jaw tightened, and without a word, he turned away, not in dismissal, but in recognition. David's smirk faded first. He stared, heart suddenly pounding. That symbol wasn't random. It wasn't a biker's mark or a hobbyist ink. It was something older, heavier, and far more dangerous. The crossed arrows. And in that instant, the old man's silence spoke louder than the recruit's laughter ever could. The silence after the laughter was heavier than any barbell in the gym. Recruits shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between each other and the old man in the corner. The sound of clattering weights faltered. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to dim. David tried to shake it off. "It's just a tattoo," he told himself. "It doesn't mean anything." But deep down, he knew better. He had seen enough war documentaries, read enough stories to recognize that look. One of the instructors broke the moment with a sharp whistle. "Back to work," he barked. Though his eyes lingered on the old man longer than usual, there was no mockery in his gaze, only respect. The recruits returned to their drills, but the energy had shifted. Their movements felt stiffer, their jokes thinner. And still, the old man sat quietly, folding his sleeve back down as if nothing had happened. His expression never changed. His eyes didn't waver. Later that evening, when the gym emptied, David lingered behind. He pretended to tie his shoes, but his eyes followed the old man as he rose from the bench. The veteran's steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing against the quiet walls. He walked out the door without a single word. David ran to the window, peering outside. A rusty pickup truck idled under the street lamp. The man climbed in, started the engine, and drove away into the dark. David whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "Who is he?" The days passed, but the old man's presence lingered in every corner of the gym. The recruits whispered about him in hushed tones between drills, never too loud, as if afraid he might appear again if they spoke his name. "Did you see the tattoo?" one muttered while chalking his hands. "Crossed arrows. Looks military, right? Maybe he's just some old hunter." But David couldn't let it go. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the barracks, hearing again the silence that had crushed their laughter. Something about those arrows gnawed at him, demanded an answer. One evening, he slipped into the base library, the glow of the old desktop computer buzzing faintly. He typed, "Cross arrows tattoo military meaning." Pages scrolled, but most results were nothing more than vague folklore, biker gangs, or decorative designs. Then, buried deep in the forgotten forum thread, he found a fragment, the cross arrows insignia of the 45th Rescue Unit, disbanded decades ago. Members carried no medals, no recognition. Their only symbol was the ink. David leaned closer, heart pounding. The unit had one purpose: to go where others couldn't. To bring back the wounded, the missing, the abandoned. Few returned. Fewer still spoke. Suddenly, the weight of what he had seen hit him like a blow. The old man wasn't just a stranger. He was a ghost of a brotherhood that history had buried. The next day, when the recruits joked about the old man again, David didn't laugh. He tightened his jaw, focused on his reps, and when one of them nudged him with a smirk, he simply said, "You don't joke about men like him." And for the first time, his words carried silence. The same silence that had once come from the corner of the gym. The weeks rolled on, and the legend of the tattoo began to seep into every corner of the training ground. Recruits no longer laughed when they saw the old man by the fence. They whispered instead, their eyes drawn to the faint outline of the arrows that peeked from beneath his sleeve whenever the wind shifted. Some said it was just a story. Others swore they could feel it, that the man's silence carried a weight heavier than any order barked through a bullhorn. One scorching afternoon, during a grueling endurance march, a young recruit stumbled hard. His pack hit the gravel, his knees buckled, and he was ready to quit. The instructors shouted, urging him to rise, but his strength was gone. Then, from the edge of the field, the veteran shifted. He didn't move closer, didn't say a word, but his presence was undeniable. His eyes locked on the recruit, calm and unflinching. The boy's chest heaved, his hands trembled, and then, as if something unseen reached inside him, he pushed himself back up. His legs wobbled, but he carried the weight again. The instructor saw it, the recruit saw it, even the fallen recruit himself knew he hadn't risen for the score, or even for the instructors. He had risen because someone who bore the cross arrows was watching. That evening, the barracks buzzed with quiet conversations. Nobody dared mock the veteran anymore. Instead, they asked the same question in hushed tones. Who was he? Days later, David couldn't resist his curiosity any longer. He stayed behind after drills, lingering near the fence post, where the old man always stood. The evening light stretched long shadows across the compound as the veteran adjusted his worn cap and turned to leave. Summoning courage, David called out softly, "Sir, those arrows, what do they mean?" For the first time, the old man paused. He didn't smile, didn't scowl. Slowly, he turned his weathered gaze toward the young recruit. His sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the tattoo more clearly. 2 arrows crossed in perfect symmetry, etched deep into skin aged by decades. "They mean I served with men," he said quietly, voice rough like gravel. "Men who never came back." David's throat tightened. He wanted to ask more about battles, about sacrifice, about the unit behind that mark, but the veteran's eyes silenced him. They weren't eyes looking for pity or admiration. They were the eyes of someone who had carried loss so long it had become part of him. Without another word, the old soldier walked away, his boots crunching against gravel. The recruits who had gathered nearby exchanged uneasy glances. No one laughed. No one whispered. They all stood taller, as if the weight of the arrows had shifted onto their shoulders too. That night, David sat awake in his bunk, the image of the tattoo seared into his mind. He realized that some lessons weren't written in manuals or shouted by instructors. Some were carved into flesh and carried silently through the years. And for the first time, he understood. Respect isn't given because of age or rank or scars. It's given because of what those scars represent. The next Thursday came. The recruits lined up on the training ground, sweat dripping, lungs burning as they powered through the course. But this time, every eye drifted toward the fence. The plaque gleamed faintly in the morning sun, reserved until he says otherwise. And then he appeared, the old man, his steps steady but slower than before, moved toward his usual post. The recruits straightened unconsciously, their movements sharper, their discipline tighter. Callahan stopped in front of the plaque. For a moment, the field seemed to fall quiet. The only sound the faint creak of leather as he crossed his arms. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But his gaze swept across the recruits, resting a second longer on David. The young soldier held his breath. Finally, Callahan lifted one weathered hand and rested it on the plaque. His fingers traced the words slowly, almost tenderly, before he gave a single nod. Then he folded his arms once again, watching in silence. And that day, no one dared to laugh. No one dared to falter. Every recruit carried the weight of that silence, pushing harder, climbing higher, not just for themselves, but for the men who had earned the right to say nothing and yet say everything. The Thursday sun broke over Camp Ridgeway, but the fence line was empty. For the first time in years, no one stood at the post. The brass plaque, reserved until he says otherwise, caught the morning light, gleaming against the frost. Recruits slowed as they passed, eyes lingering on the absence, their movements heavy with unspoken questions. By evening, word spread through the compound. Thomas Callahan had passed away quietly in his sleep. No speeches, no headlines, just the way he had lived. The silence that once carried his weight now became his legacy. That weekend, the recruits and instructors gathered at the fence. David Miller, no longer a boy but a hardened instructor, placed a folded American flag beneath the plaque. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the same cross arrows tattoo he had chosen years earlier, not to mimic Callahan, but to remember him. The recruits followed suit not with ink, but with resolve. Each one stood straighter, breathed deeper, and carried themselves with the discipline of men who understood what silence meant. From that day forward, every new class at Ridgeway was brought to the fence post. They were told not just of drills, tactics, and endurance, but of a man who never commanded them with words, only with presence. Because some legacies are not carved into stone or written in books, they live in the posture of those who refuse to forget. And Thomas Callahan's silence marched on, long after his final breath. The plaque remained, the silence remained, and though the old soldier was gone, his crossed arrows lived on not just in ink, but in every man who now stood taller when they saw them. Some legacies aren't spoken, they're carried. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss new uploads. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you know a story of a silent hero too? On this channel, you'll find forgotten war stories, untold sacrifices, and moments of humanity that deserve to be remembered. Together, we can make sure these voices live on. Like, subscribe, share. Because some stories should never be forgotten.